Welcome back, everybody, to Persuasion Part 2. So far we've already talked about a couple of persuasion ideas, including ideas of reciprocity, how you phrase things, that kind of stuff. So what we're going to do next is keep going with these different ideas of compliance techniques, but we're going to start with, in this case, using prior commitments. So have you ever seen somebody offer you a free trial? A prior commitment just means saying yes to something. It can even be as simple as using a free trial, right? So saying yes to one thing leads people to want to be consistent. And that consistency can lead them to say yes to subsequent requests. So let me ask you, have you paid for something after using the free trial? So, for example, in this case, we'll be talking about, hey, did you end up paying for, I don't know, Netflix or a streaming service after the free trial of it? And many of us have done that. Well, often it sometimes it's because you forget and just keep going. But sometimes you're like, oh, I already watched it for a while and it's been, so I'm just going to keep being consistent. I said yes before, I'll say yes again. Now, the way that you would use this is dependent on several things. So we're going to talk about the foot in the door technique in just a minute. But the way that you would use this has to do with the idea of getting commitment for one request and then getting commitment for a larger request later on. So the idea is get them saying yes. In fact, in many sales technique trainings, they say, hey, get the person saying yes. The idea is that you want to be cognitively consistent, right? I said yes before, I'll say yes again. I'll say yes before, I'll say yes again. You want to be consistent. You want to be seen as somebody who is consistent with what they say. Now, that's not a really good reason to go buy a boat, for example, but we like to be consistent with the things that we say yes to. So if we said yes once, we don't want to go back and say no, because that would mean inconsistency. Now, I know that sounds silly, but it actually does work to a certain extent. So, for example, let's talk about using the foot in the door technique. Now, remember, the foot in the door technique and the door in the face technique are based off the idea of a salesperson, a door-to-door salesperson who goes around knocking on doors and says, hey, do you want to buy, you want to buy a vacuum, for example. Okay, so in this particular case, the foot in the door is almost the opposite of the door in the face. If you remember, the door in the face is you want them to say no. You want them to slam the door in your face. That idea that they say no to the first request, they're more likely to say yes to the second. The foot in the door is is the opposite of this. You want them to say yes to the first request. They'll be much more likely to say yes to a subsequent request. So, there's several studies that have been done on this. Remember, we talked about Cialdini in the past, but one study that's a good one is the idea of signing a petition. So what they did in this particular case is they went on a college campus and they went around saying, hey, would you be willing to sign this petition to save the environment? Does that make sense? Sign this petition in order to save the environment. And almost everybody's willing to say yes to that. And they sign the petition. Like, oh, great, thank you. Now, would you be willing to donate to this environmental cause? When they did that, signed the petition first, and then asked for a donation, they got a lot more money than they did when they just straight out asked for the donation. People like to say yes. Well, I just said that I'm all for the environment. I signed this petition, and now you're asking me for money. Well, I want to be consistent, right? I don't want to sound like I'm going back on my word, so I'm more likely to pay money when asked for a donation. Let's watch an example of this. So that was an example from the Big Bang Theory. So in the Big Bang Theory, in this case, Sheldon is asking Penny to take care of him. And what he does is he gets a series of smaller requests and then builds them up. Now, you might have noticed that in the very, very beginning, he asks for a rather large request, which is a sponge bath, and she shuts him down. So maybe that's a door in the face. But the foot in the door is the later part that we're talking about. Hey, would you rub this on my chest? Hey, would you sing this song to me? Right? Each one building up to what they actually want. Right? So once he gets her saying yes, then she keeps saying yes to subsequent requests. He gets his foot in the door and asks for what he wants. Okay, let's keep going. The lowball technique. Now, the lowball technique is not what a lot of people say it is, right? So a lot of people say lowball is just you give a really low offer so that you can anchor and adjust. But that's not how the lowball technique really works. That does work, by the way. We already talked about anchoring and adjustment in a previous chapter. But lowball that's not what it's based on. A lowball technique has to do with the idea of offering a deal and then coming back and making the deal less attractive after they have already said yes to the deal, right? So they've committed to the deal, and then you go back and then you do extra things. So let's watch an example of this using car lots, and these happen to be in Canada. So we'll watch just a bit of this video. So in that particular video, you saw that people were committing to buying a car, right? Now the technique was they would say, "Oh, we're going to buy at this price. What a great price! I'm going to buy this car at this price. That sounds really good." And then what they would do is they would come back and say, "Oh, I'm sorry, that particular car, we can't do that particular car. But here's another car that we're willing to give you, and we're willing to knock off this amount of money, which is more money than before." So the idea here is they got the person to commit to the first car, right? And what they're trying to do is get them to commit to the higher priced car. So what's going on there is the commitment, the original commitment, I'm going to buy this car, is then followed up with the idea that I am going to, you can't have that one, but here's the problem. We're going to do this differently. You've already said yes, you don't want to say no to this one. More commonly, this is seen, the lowball technique is seen with ideas of extra fees. So, with a car dealership, they ask you to buy a car, and you say, yes, I'm going to buy a car, and then they come back and say, great, that's a great price. Now all we have to do is make sure we pay these fees that are our policy to add on, right? And they'll add a bunch of fees on there. Those extra fees are part of the lowball technique, right? What they're doing is they're saying, hey, here's what we had both agreed on, and now we're just going to add a few fees. We're making it less attractive. We're going to make it less good for you. But since you've said yes, you're really unlikely to go back and say, oh no, I'm not going to do it anymore. You're more likely to just keep saying, oh well, fine, we'll do the fees. Okay. So foot in the door is different than the lowball technique. Foot in the door is different than the lowball technique. Foot in the door is ask for a small request, then follow up with a larger request. A lowball technique is you get them to say yes to a specific request, like buying this car, and then you make their end of the deal less attractive, and they're less likely to say no because they've already said yes. So, for example, you get them to commit to buying a car, and then you come back with all these fees and other things that they have to buy in order to purchase the car. Okay. Last one we want to talk about is ideas of scarcity. Scarcity. When things are scarce, they tend to be more attractive. So even Aristotle said, what is rare is a greater good than what is plentiful. The idea of something being scarce makes it more valuable, at least psychologically, to people. Now, one of the reasons why people think this might be is because of the loss of freedom to choose. That's called reactance or reactivity. When I feel like my ability to do something is taken away, I react against it. So, for example, you say, well, gosh, you could buy this, but boy, it's not a lot of time on this one. You're like, what? Not a lot of time? I feel like my freedom to buy that thing is being taken away. I am going to buy it because I feel like my freedom is being taken away. That's the reactance idea in scarcity. Okay, it's not that it's actually rare, but by making it seem rare, people can actually drive up the price and make you more likely to comply to a request. Let's do an example. How much would you pay for this handbag? Well, this handbag happens to be a Birkin bag by Hermes, and Birkin bags are normally made out of materials that are very similar. It's not like this is made out of, like moon rocks or something like that. But this particular bag, when I looked at it today, was selling for $28,000. Birkin bags range from thousands, tens of thousands normally, to hundreds of thousands of dollars for a bag like this. Why? Well, one of the main reasons why is because they don't let people buy them. And you're like, what? Don't let people to buy them. There are a scarce number of the Birkin bags. They keep the supply very, very low, and the demand goes through the roof. The idea here is, oh, only the coolest people can really buy it. Only the exclusive people could buy an Hermes Birkin bag. And you're like, exclusive? I'm exclusive. Can't believe I really want one. There's only the exclusive people. I can do that. The scarcity drives up the price. And it's not like Hermes couldn't make a lot of these bags. They could, absolutely. But by making only a few, they're able to drive the price through the roof. That scarcity makes them more attractive. It's not because they can't make them. They choose to do it in order for people to pay more money for it. In the same way, that's why they do limited editions of comic books, sneakers, whatever it happens to be. The limited edition creates scarcity. But there are other ways that we create scarcity. Have you ever said, ooh, but this is on sale, and suddenly you automatically want it? Well, what's going on there? Sale prices are often done because people, the companies, know this is the price that I actually want people to buy it. So what I'm going to do is generally I'm going to make it this price, and then for like, a couple weeks every month, I'm going to take that price down 20% to what I actually want to buy. In fact, there's a famous study in business about J.C. Penney. J.C. Penney's it's a famous department store / clothing store, and they got a new CEO, and the CEO is like, hey, here's what we're going to do. We're just going to actually ask for the price that we want. And their sales plummeted. They're like, no way. They fired the CEO. They went back to the sales. Now remember, what the sales were doing is he was charging the sale price every day. He just didn't call it a sale price because it wasn't on sale. And they lost money. Why? Because there was less demand for what they were doing. However, when they had sales, for a limited time only, 20% off, it created more scarcity. And by creating more scarcity, created more demand for those products. This is also done, like if you ever watch those commercials and they're like, the next 15 minutes and you will get, blah, 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 blah. You could call anytime you want. They don't actually have a timer saying, oh, sorry, you are in Colorado and time's up. No, they just make you feel that way. They just make you feel that way in order to create the scarcity, which increases the demand. All right. The deadline technique is the one that we talked about with giving somebody a deadline, right? You target a person, the target person is told they only have a limited time to take advantage of the offer. So for example, a limited time to take advantage of a sale. Let's watch a scene from a movie. I think this is called Boiler Room, where they are selling stocks, which frankly are not worth what they're talking about. So go ahead and watch this video and see if you can't find a deadline technique. Now, in that video you watched, you saw that he said, "Hey, boy, this isn't going to happen very much. It's just, only this. I can only give you this much, right?" And by doing that, it created that demand, right? So by saying, "Hey, you only have this amount of time, or it's going to go," that's one scarcity technique. The other one was saying, "Oh, I can only sell you 2,000 shares." I'm like, "Oh, really? Well, why is that?" Because they're creating scarcity. That's not really true. He's creating a psychological desire and creating an idea of scarcity when before there really wasn't one. Okay, one thing that we want to talk about as well is a last concept of social proof. Have you ever done something or bought something or because word of mouth, you've heard that it's really good, your friends said, hey, this is great? Well, social proof just says this has been proved to be good or desirable because a lot of people like it, right? You assume that the restaurant must be good because there's a line out the door. In that clip that we just saw, the Boiler Room, he tried to use an idea of social proof by having people yelling and screaming about this particular stock, right? By doing that, he's like, oh man, lots of people really want it, so that must make it really important. He's creating a certain idea of social proof. You can get this when you get testimonials. You can get this when people tell you about based off of a word of mouth, an influencer, for example, other things. But generally, if people tend to like it, it tends to be more desirable. People are more likely to comply with whatever that happens to be. Okay, so let's talk about this then. Not that question. Let's talk about how you might use these compliance techniques. Let's start with the idea, going back, let's start with the idea of using prior commitments, the foot in the door technique, if you wanted a ride to the airport. How would you use the foot in the door technique if you wanted a ride to the airport? What you would do is you'd get them to say yes to a smaller request. Oh, will you take me to the store? And then follow that up with a big request. While we're out, would you mind taking me to the airport? That kind of a thing. That would be a foot in the door. Okay. Let's ask you then, how would you use scarcity to get a ride to the airport? And this one's a little bit harder. I understand that. But what you would say is something like, hey, for limited time only, you can take me to the airport. But that sounds kind of weird. Normally what you do is you want them to, you would give them something in return. So, hey, if you promise to take me to the airport within the next 20 minutes, I will do XYZ for you. I'll take care of your dishes. But this offer's only good in the next 20 minutes, right? You create that scarcity. Or you go up to all your roommates and you're saying, hey, for a limited time only, the person who promises to take me to the airport, I will do all their chores for 1 week, but only for the first person who says yes in 20 minutes, that kind of a thing. That would create an idea of scarcity, makes it more desirable. All right. Good. Let's go ahead and stop there.